Hi, I'm Rocco Stano, and welcome to StoryMakers. Today we have New York Times best-selling author and the host of Beyond Belief on the Oprah channel, Wes Moore. Welcome, Wes.
It is great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Yes, and besides that, you have a new book out called This Way Home, a YA book.
I do.
Yes,
I do.
But before we talk about this book, you're our first guest ever to be on the cover of Time magazine. How did that come about?
So, you know, I'm a veteran, combat arms veteran in Afghanistan, and Time magazine was doing a piece basically about veterans who were now coming home and what they were doing to essentially continue their mission when they were overseas. How, you know, for so many vets, they have a very clear and distinct mission that they're doing while they're deployed, and when they come back home, there is this feeling of they want to be part of something bigger than themselves, but they're trying to figure out what exactly that means. So they had a handful of people, Paul Rykoff, who runs Iraq, Afghanistan Veterans of America, John Galena and Dale Beatty, who run Purple Heart Homes, you know, Elizabeth McNally, who does a lot of work on veterans issues, myself. And so they featured a handful of vets and how, as we've come back home, our mission still continues. It might be in areas of education, it might be in areas of, you know, homelessness, it might be in areas of housing, but we're still carrying on our mission, and so it was a great honor.
And one of your projects is BridgeEDU,
Correct.
and that's your foundation.
Correct, yes.
And it deals with education.
It does. It really deals with this idea where we're doing a better job nationally of getting kids through high school. You know, currently 80% of all kids who start high school will actually complete and get their high school degree. The challenge has become higher education. And it's for a collection of different reasons. For some of it's financial, some of it's academic, some of it's social. But not only have we seen higher ed numbers stay flat, we've actually seen them start to recede. And so really what we said was, well, if the choke point seems to be the freshman year of college, then why can't we reinvent the freshman year? Completely change the structure of what the freshman year is to give students a better momentum, to give them a better calculation so they can actually not just start college, but complete. Because when we think about the way, you know, 21st century economy and 21st century workings, just getting your degree from Digital High School or Frederick Douglass High School, that's not going to be enough in order to stay competitive in the long term. So we really want our students, particularly first generation, lower income, minority students, et cetera, we want them to be as competitive as humanly possible.
So how do you select the students that go through this program?
They actually, well, there's two different ways. One, they come to us and they say, hey, I'm very interested in college, but I would be interested in looking at all the different services and supports that BridgeEDU brings on board. Coaching, tutoring, personalized assessments, career exploration, all those other things that we feel like makes the college experience stickier. And the other thing is colleges will come to us because colleges know every year they accept a certain amount of schools. You know, 85% of schools in this country, colleges in this country, are either open access or non-competitive. So by definition, they accept over 50% of the people that apply. So they know that there's a certain percentage of the kids that they will accept every single year that will have a challenge matriculating. And really what they say is, you know, particularly for the ones that we think this could be difficult, but we want them to succeed, can your services and supports help us to do our jobs better? And that's really what we try to do.
When you say they come to you, they could come to you by visiting your website?
Correct. Yeah, they can just go to BridgeEDU.com, and literally from that site at BridgeEDU.com, they can get information about how exactly to work with us, about areas that we're working in now, about the stories of our scholars, and why we're really excited and blessed to be doing the work that we're doing.
Many people know you from your best-selling book, The Other Wes Moore, but those that aren't familiar with the book that has sold many, many, many copies, and it's been on the bestseller list, can you just briefly tell us that story?
Absolutely. So The Other Wes Moore is really both a biographical and an autobiographical journey where the day after I received the Rhodes Scholarship, the Baltimore Sun, which is my hometown paper, wrote this article about this kid local kid, who despite challenges as I was coming up, just received this award and was going off to England on a scholarship. And at the same time, they were writing a whole series of articles about 4 guys who walked into a jewelry store and then ended up murdering an off-duty police officer in the process of this. And there was a 12-day national manhunt for these 4 guys. They finally caught all 4 of them. And when they finally caught the last one, I found out, and we all found out, that one of the people that the police were looking for, that was eventually captured and tried and convicted and sentenced for the crime, was this guy whose name was also Wes Moore. So the paper's writing about how this one Wes Moore is going off to England on the scholarship. The other Wes Moore just received life in prison without the possibility of parole. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized how much more we had in common than just our names. And so with The Other Wes Moore, it's really a story about these two kids and what ends up happening in the lives of these two kids that end up causing this split. And one of the things I really wanted to kind of show and highlight with that story is that the chilling truth is that his story could have been mine. And the tragedy is that my story could have been his. And what do we do to help that thin line? Because it really is a thin line between our life and someone else's life. What do we do to help all of our people, particularly our students, be able to navigate those thin lines that they face every single day between success and failure and going one way and going someplace completely different?
There actually is a book called Discovering Wes Moore, which is it's from The Other Wes Moore, but it's for younger children, right?
Yeah. It is, and really that came from teachers. Because teachers were telling us, like, we really enjoy The Other Wes Moore. It's just a bit too old for our students who happen to maybe be middle schoolers or whatever the case is. There were some students who we work with. I helped to co-found a platform now, I guess 13 years ago, called STAND, where we work with kids involved in the juvenile justice system in Baltimore. And one thing that I noticed, that even though we had students who were 16, 17, 18 years old, they just weren't reading at a grade level where The Other Wes Moore was something that could be easily digestible for them. And so basically I listened to our teachers and said, well, if there's a way that we can share the story for a younger audience, then why not create a YA version of The Other Wes Moore? And so essentially Discovering Wes Moore is the YA version, the young adult version of The Other Wes Moore. And
just recently, your YA novel, This Way Home, came out, and I read it over the weekend, and I have to say it is a gritty story, and it's about it's about one person, Elijah, and how much of, and it's set in Baltimore, and there's a lot of basketball in there, and Elijah is a pretty intelligent young man who's heading to college and perhaps a basketball scholarship. And just wondering how much of Elijah is based on you?
I think it was one of the things that I really loved about fiction in that way, where I feel like Elijah and his friends, Michael and Dylan and such, many of them are composites. So there is a lot of me in Michael, there's a lot of me in Elijah, there's a lot of me in Dylan, and there's a lot of friends who we knew growing up. And I think having the ability to coordinate with Shawn in this was wonderful, because it's taking his different experiences in Ithaca, my different experiences in Baltimore, and being able to come up with a narrative and a story that really ties it all together. But the great thing about writing novels and writing fiction was it allowed your imagination to go. With Discovering Wes Moore, with The Other Wes Moore, is all you're fact checking, you're this, you're that, and with this, it's like, why not have them do X? Why not have them do Y? And that was a really fun process to go through and kind of delve into the fiction world as well.
And you mentioned Shawn. Shawn Goodman was your co-author, and he is based in Ithaca, New York.
Correct.
He works with teens. And how did that collaboration come about?
It really came about with our editor, Beverly Horowitz, who is a wonderful, wonderful editor and a great person. And she was like, as we're talking about these concepts, she was like, have you ever had a chance to read anything by Shawn Goodman? And I was like, no. She's like, you should check some stuff out. And I went back and I said, he's great. I was like, he's a great writer. She's like, I think it would actually be really interesting if you guys, had a conversation and touch base, and then the conversation then turns into, we should work together, as these things often do. And I really respected not just his experience inside the classroom, but I also really respected his sense of touch on the subjects that we're trying to illustrate. His sense of his real sense of tangible understanding of what's going on with so many of these kids.
Now, you mentioned Beverly Horowitz, a well-respected editor at Random House, who actually worked with Walter D. Myers. And when I was reading this book, it was reminiscent of some of Walter D. Myers' books. Did that ever come up in conversation?
It did. In fact, we actually recently received a review where, complimenting the book and saying that it kind of falls into the space the passing of Mr. Myers kind of let out,
Right.
which was a huge honor
Right.
to even be mentioned in that same breath. And the exciting thing about it for this was we know the circumstances and situations that so many kids are facing. I see it every single day. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted the writing to be able to illustrate that. I don't want it to be, I understand that it's YA, but I also don't want it to be sugar-coated. Mm-hmm. The world that many of our kids are living in is hard. The reality that they face every single day is real. And I wanted the writing to reflect that. I want for when young people read this book, I want them to say, he gets my life. Mm-hmm. He gets what I see. He understands what I know. Not something where you're reading it and it feels so far removed from what you know and what you realize that essentially at some point you just say this thing rings untrue.
All three of the characters come from single-family homes. Yeah. And the mother in this book gives her son some advice, Elijah some advice, and says, sometimes the dream is more important than the thing itself. Does that make any sense? So is that something that's dear to you?
Yeah, because I'm a big believer in this idea. When we're in the military, there was this expression that we were always told during basic was, you cannot hit a target that you can't see. And I was always fascinated by that. And what they meant was, you need to have eyes on an objective if you're going to take down an objective. But the thing that always got me about that comment was, I think that's actually the same with life, right? You can't hit a target that you can't see.
You mentioned the military, and there's a character in the book who serves as a sort of mentor.
Yeah,
Mr. Banks,
Yeah,
right?
Banks.
Yes, and he was in the Special Forces.
Yes.
And again, did you draw? You probably drew upon your experience in creating that character. Absolutely. Too.
And it was great. I mean, I really enjoyed his character because he's a very mysterious, enigmatic kind of guy.
He is, yeah.
He loves his privacy. He loves being alone. He doesn't want everybody in his business. But his main goal right now is just reconnecting with his daughter, mm-hmm. who he was estranged from for so many years because he was so committed to his work and he's constantly deployed. And so this now became this chance for him to reconnect with his daughter. Elijah, in many ways, almost becomes a distraction at the beginning, the relationship that he's building up with Elijah. But the thing that I kind of loved about the narrative was, while initially that relationship with Elijah almost feels like a distraction for him, it ends up being the thing that almost helps to save him and helps to save the relationship with his daughter. And so I love the complexity of that. And then how, when he was telling people outside, he's like, yeah, I was in the military, I was an accountant. Mm-hmm. In the military. And they had no idea that he wasn't an accountant in the Army. He was one of the best special operators in the history of the military. And then how those techniques that they used were actually the thing that really helped to kind of save the day. The ability to help destroy an enemy by never firing a shot.
Right. But the other thing I found interesting was the insight into gangs and how much influence they have in neighborhoods. Yeah. And was that something you experienced?
Yeah, and I think it's something that we, our young people experience all the time. And the thing I kind of wanted to even highlight and illustrate with this story was gangs are not terribly complicated. I remember Shawn and I had these conversations oftentimes about it, where people have this perception that gangs are these really intricate and complicated organizations. They're not. They take the same structure of a Fortune 500 company, mm-hmm. or they take the same structure of a military organization, and they carbon copy it. But there's nothing excessively complicated about what gangs do or about how they're organized or how they're structured. But what they do is they want that person, that young person generally, to feel a sense of belonging. And as long as you can replicate that sense of belonging and scale that out, then you have a large organization and you have members of the organization who will now do anything for the organization. You know, we're never going to be able to combat, you know, gangs at, you know, just simply saying, let's just put more police force on, let's put more all that kind of stuff. Because, you know, listen, there's a role for that. But if you're not attacking a choke point, and if you're not attacking their ability to bring more people on board, then we're going to continue having a much bigger problem.
The book holds some surprises, and I'm not going to ruin any of the surprises in here, but it actually, the design of the book also is that in the beginning of each chapter, there is this little illustration of a chain link fence that goes throughout the book. So you always have that feeling of place.
Yes. In place and space were always very important as a distinct thread throughout this story. You know, and everything from, you know, kind of bringing them back to the basketball courts, or bringing them back to the conversations between Banks and Elijah, or even simply the design of the book.
Right.
We wanted to continually remind the reader of both place and space in all this work.
Well, as I mentioned, basketball plays a very big role in this story. And, you know, to close, why don't you read a passage from the book?
Great.
And you could set it up for us.
Yes. So this is actually coming off of one of the big basketball tournaments. You know, these basketball tournaments play a big role in a lot of these communities. For some, it's about bragging rights. For some, it's about exposure. For some, there's actually real big money that can be made off of them. And what that oftentimes is, when you have anything that involves money, it brings people in. And in this case, the guys are going through. Elijah's as you said, a very talented basketball player, and gets caught up in a team that is being sponsored by one of the local area gangs. Again, one of the great ways that they're going and they recruit, you know, people is they equip them with the best clothes and the best gear, and they make it seem really cool. And these kind of promises that are made to our young people are some of the things that really help to bring them in. And so what we wanted to do with this writing was really just try to be as descriptive as possible to kind of really place the reader where, even if you are not familiar with that culture, even if you're not familiar with the environments, we want to have you sitting courtside when all this stuff is going on. So there's a section here where it says, at the sound of the ref's whistle, Elijah dropped deep, guarding his man loosely, giving up way too much real estate north of the foul line. But he knew Michael was behind him, crouched low, just waiting for the shooter to plant his feet. And when he did, Elijah peeled to the side. Michael pushed off his thick, powerful legs. He rose up high for a man in his breath and swatted the ball with one oven mitt of a hand, spinning it off of his fingertips. Two players launched into the air for the rebound, both acutely aware that the fate of the game might be at stake.
Yes, well, that's just one of the many scenes in the book that are very descriptive of the action and also the various characters that you create. Thanks for joining us today, and I'm sure that many public libraries and high school libraries would probably benefit by having This Way Home in their collection. So remember, until next time, give a kid a book in any format.